Hot stove conversations about baseball, history, football, and current events that may leave you saying there's more to consider. Now, here's your host, Jack Moore.
Welcome to another edition of More to Consider. So I've said in past shows, I opened with the JFK assassination show, talked about pro football, my history in working in professional baseball in different levels. But I am an attorney, and I love to have guests on that can actually talk about the law. And a large part of how law works is jurisdiction. It's by what authority. I don't think people tend to really think about that. So my special guest today is Kirk Beck, who has been in education for over 40 years. He did serve the United States Army as a captain. He's worked as an engineer with Shell Oil Company. Just a lot of great successes in the background. He has dedicated his life to his Christian faith, his family, and this is the important key for our show today, his search for the truth regarding the American Constitution and its common law roots. I don't know that the average person on the streets even really has much of an idea of what the term common law means. He has been on many shows discussing the power of paper, how it's led to the usage of affidavits in many areas, which have been instrumental to him. One of the things that we discussed going in, he's got his copy of the Constitution. And one of the things we discussed going in, I've been in political talk radio. I was greatly influenced by a buddy of mine that would probably be best described as libertarian, as I think I'm pretty much that same way. And the big key to me, really kind of pulling political philosophy, was The Law by Frederick Bastiat, who was a French economist and philosopher who wrote this a couple of years prior to his death of tuberculosis. And he opens with, the law is about the protection of your individual rights. The only rights we really have is the right of self-defense. And the only legitimate collective right would be to protect your individual rights. Anything else he called plunder. So he goes, if there's plunder, the government doing things it's not supposed to do, you either become political and become a part of the plunder, or you have to end the plunder. Captain Beck is also the author of Parenting the Passive Rebel, and he's now working on the second book, Officer Hanson, Compassion in Blue. It's in this book that he attempts to entertain, educate, and alleviate the souls of the readers to make the commitment to sacrifice for a more compassionate method of handling potentially violent situations. Captain Kirk, I am so honored to have you on. How are you today, sir?
Well, Mr. Moore, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to hear someone speak the way you speak,
Thank you.
especially being an attorney.
Yeah, it's been an interesting road for me. When I got out of practice, I went back into college coaching and college teaching of criminal justice, and nobody's really there to monitor me. So I would open classes. I would open any criminal justice class with, by what authority? And they're like, what? I mean, didn't the General Assembly pass? I'm like, well, by what authority does the law officer pull you over at 3 a.m.? By what authority? What rights do you have? I'm sure you see a lot of the videos today where these auditors go on the street and they're open carrying a firearm and there's no articulable suspicion of crime. And these young cops don't know that. They just got a call from somebody down the street saying somebody's suspicious, carrying an AR-15 on their shoulder, which it is. But that doesn't mean they're committing a crime in an open carry state. So you see all these battles that people are putting up. But most Americans really, and I understand, it's part of the failure of the education system, they really don't understand the basis of our country. So in that class, I'd not only say by what authority, I'd read them the Declaration of Independence. What is Brother Jefferson actually saying? What does he mean by the rights of men are secured through government? If they stop doing it, abolish and alter it, start all over. What's your thoughts on that? Where we are, how we got here?
Wow. That is so awesome. I've been interviewed 20-some times, and rarely do I have somebody hit this point and that point and that point so well. It's, as I said at the beginning, the fact that you're an attorney, because my interaction with attorneys usually leaves me with my jaw dropping. I actually had an attorney come to our church running for judge, and when it was over, I didn't want to put her on the spot in front of a lot of people, but there were a few there. I said, well, what is the Seventh Amendment?
Mm-hmm.
And she got all red-faced and she didn't know. I said, ma'am, that's the amendment that gives me a right to have certain effect in your courtroom, a jury trial.
Jury trial.
She didn't know that. Now she's really red-faced. Fortunately, she lost the election. Probably a really nice person. But imagine someone wants to be a judge, someone who's been 10 years a district attorney, assistant district attorney, and doesn't know the Seventh Amendment gives me a right to have a jury trial in her courtroom. So what's the likelihood that there's a lot of other blind spots that she has regarding the Constitution?
Well, I think you probably saw, I was shocked that Senator Kennedy from Louisiana and some of the nominees before the Senate, I remember him asking one young lady who's been on a federal level bench at some level, I think for 14 years, or she's been in the court system. And he goes, what's Article 2 of the Constitution? No idea. What's Article 5 of the Constitution? No idea. Well, sir, if that ever came before me in court, I'd research it. And he goes, but you don't know what's in Article 2 of the Constitution. And you don't want to play stump the chump and get people. But it is interesting because they all went to Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, and then they're like, I've never heard of Article 2. You heard of Article 3, which created the federal courts. You know that? I mean, it's really interesting that they're in the position to be on the federal court and a senator asked them something as simple as an article of the Constitution, a body of the Constitution they're not familiar with.
I want to say this before we go on any longer.
Yes, sir.
At the end, I want to give a gift to everybody who follows this. I think it'll be very helpful to anybody who wants to use the power of paper. And I'll explain what it is later, but I wanted to mention that right now. I was defending myself once in a misdemeanor case. It always has to do with driving, or in my case, traveling. And I'm a recidivist when it comes to rolling stops. I don't drink, so I don't have to worry about that one. That's the one that's really a problem because that brings a lot of threat to other people. But a rolling stop at 2 o'clock in the morning, nobody around, that started over 40 years ago, went back when I lived in Colorado. It started me thinking, well, there's nobody out here that I'm hurting. Nobody's complaining. And then again, where's the money going? I'm going to pay a fine to an organization that's going to get the money. And it caused me a lot of consideration. I paid it. And over the years, I always paid it. Until I came to one case, I got so mad, I said, I'm not going to pay it. Well, that was stupid because the next thing that happens, you get a suspended license and then you get another rolling stop, and now you're in court in a misdemeanor case. Nevertheless, I'm arguing against the seasoned district attorney, and she's making she's making a lot of mistakes. The judge had to actually reprimand her in front of everybody. Exculpatory evidence, your district attorney, he does not have to ask for that. You have to give that to him, and you don't give it to him in the hall to 30 minutes before the court case. So she's getting beat up by the judge. Later on, I objected to something else, and the judge said, Mr. Beck, you're going to have to explain that. So I began to, he let me go. It was a pretty reasonable judge. It was a bench trial. I like trials because when you have the jury in there, they want to protect the jury too much. I agree. They don't want the jury to hear the truth. So I just have a bench trial. I'm trying to set it up so I can have an appeal. I learned a lot in that court case. I never would have learned this stuff going to law school. And I did go to law school for one semester. And so the judge says, you have to explain that. I began, and then he stopped me and he said, whoa, Mr. Beck, you bring up some very valid points. Nevertheless, that's not why we're here today. You should have brought that up by way of pretrial motion, and the light bulb went on. My patriot friends that go into court and start arguing the Constitution have walked into a statutory jurisdiction, and the judge might let you run off for a while, or he might cut you off right away, and you're going to walk off saying, this courtroom is corrupt, there's no way you can get justice in here. The judge simply didn't give you the information he gave me. If I want to bring up the Constitution, in common law, I need to bring that up by way of pretrial motion. I have to set the proper jurisdiction. And that's where we lose. We just go in and start arguing, and it doesn't get you anywhere except maybe contempt of court, which isn't pleasant. I'm always very tactful and very respectful of whoever is sitting up there. But I now recognize I have to take it into the proper jurisdiction. So when I met Jack and Margie Flynn down in Arkansas, by way of a jury trial in which I was one of the people on the jury pool, and that's a big story right there. But I learned that there's this process of what I now call power of paper is extremely effective. So I got my next rolling stop ticket. I decided to play the Constitution, not arguing little points, but going for the basis of government in this country being the Constitution. I sent the arresting officer a cordial letter. It was by return receipt, certified mail, but it was just a letter because Jack and Margie said, always treat your adversary with respect. You may not like them personally, you may not like what they stand for, but always treat people respectfully and you'll get some back. Well, I didn't get a response, and they said, you won't get one, but it's still the right thing to do. I followed it up then with the affidavit. And in common law, an unrebutted affidavit stands as truth in any court in the United States. Now, again, probably the best way to do that is through the pretrial motion process rather than bringing it into the actual court hearing. But nevertheless, I sent him an affidavit, and I spelled out to him two rules of due process that he violated when he arrested me. Now, a lot of Americans, if you ask them, have you ever been arrested? And they'd say, well, no, I've never been arrested. Have you ever gotten a ticket? Yeah. Well, you've been arrested.
That's correct.
Just try to leave. You'll find out you've been arrested. You'll also get some custodial time. So I sent him the affidavit. I spelled out to him exactly what he did wrong. And 2 days later, I walked into court, or no, I take that back. My wife's phone is ringing. I turned mine off. I'm sorry about that, but
That's okay.
it's going to stop right there. Okay, so I sent the affidavit to the officer, and 2 months later, I'm in court. I always take a witness with me when I go to court. Never go in alone. And I didn't even have to say anything. The deputy walked in. We saw each other. He gave something to the judge, and 2 minutes later, he's saying, Mr. Beck, you can leave. Your case has been dropped. So it worked. All these times I've gone to court and tried this technique or that, but by the use of the affidavit, it stopped it in its track.
Let me ask you then, okay, you said you sent him a certified letter he just ignored.
Right.
Then you hit him with the affidavit.
Yeah.
And when you say you questioned the violation of your due process, specifically regarding that particular traffic encounter, what did you say in that to him?
I pointed out to him that in law, as he well knows, words have specific definition.
Right.
And the word driver is tied to commerce.
Uh-huh.
The whole DMV code, motor vehicle, is another word of commerce. I was not involved in commerce. I was simply traveling in my car. Traveling is a right. Driving is a privilege. Absolutely. Driving is a privilege. You're using the roads for hire. You're using the roads for profit. And everything in the DMV code you must live by. When I'm traveling, I live by the common law, which says if I'm tailgating somebody and he slams on his brakes and I run into him, I can't run around and say, I'm above the law. I'm not above the law. I'm not above the common law. Never will be. I still have to follow the rules of the road. And if I violate them and it causes injury to anybody else, I'm liable. That's why I have liability insurance.
Are you in essence saying then when you hit him with the affidavit, you're in essence saying, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not agreeing to come under this DMV law. I want to have the jurisdiction of the common law, which makes me a traveler, not a driver under the DMV aspect of the law. I'm not accepting that. Is that sort of what you're saying in that affidavit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, second point was we have the Supreme Court of California case Sava versus California, or California versus Sava. And in this Supreme Court decision, they said that since a traffic violation is merely an infraction and not a crime, you don't get a jury trial. It's just an infraction. But a law enforcement agent can only arrest if they're carrying out a warrant, if they're acting on a verifiable complaint, or if they actually see a crime. But words in law have meaning. It's not a crime. My moving through a stop sign without having my wheels come to a complete stop is an infraction. So in fact, I'm telling the law enforcement, the deputy, technically you're making a false arrest. You should understand the law. You cannot arrest me when I'm moving in my automobile as a traveler. I'm sorry, that's the law. You're stuck with it just like I am. So I'm certain that my letter probably went in the trash can, although we had to sign for it. But I guarantee my affidavit didn't go in the trash can, because the beautiful thing about the affidavit is I'm not sending it to a government agency. I'm sending it to the police officer. All my affidavits go directly to a person. If I find a government agency is abusing its power, I want to find out who the guy at the top is, because that's the guy we're going after. And they don't like it, because I've got 4 other situations that we could talk about where I named people, just like I named the deputy officer. He came into court and he said, I don't want to mess with this guy. And I'm pretty sure that somebody up in the legal department of the sheriff's department looked it over and said, there's bigger fish to fry. Let this guy go. You never know why you win. They'll never tell you why you win. All I know is I win. And that's good enough for me. I just wish it were good enough for more people. Because until more people get interested in what I'm talking about, I'll live a better life, but my country is still going in the wrong direction. There are far too many people who like to complain, and they're even what I call pornography of fear. They love to tell you how bad things are, but they'll never give you a solution. And you mentioned it earlier when we were talking. These people running around, they call this country a democracy. And they got national audiences. Tucker Carlson keeps calling it a democracy.
Yeah, he does. He does.
What is he doing? I mean, I know this guy's IQ is a lot higher than mine, but I don't understand why this very elementary principle is missed by 95% of Americans.
Well, I tell you something. I pick up on things all the time. This is a weird route for me to go, but I can remember about 25 or so years ago, I started seeing the interjection of gender over and over, where I knew, and I know that gender relates to languages, the gradations between masculine and feminine, etc., but it never applied to sex, male, female. And I started to notice 25 or so years ago, as we moved into our present day in the last 5 to 10 years, it really accelerated. But I noticed that the population began to kind of agree to that term of when we're talking strictly of male and female, we're saying gender. There's 2 genders or there's many genders. I'm like, now what you're saying is sex. It's, you can remember years ago, you'd fill out a form. It said sex, male, female, M and F, you check the box. And in the same light, I don't know how many years, it's been more than a couple of decades, attack on our democracy. Democracy, we got to preserve our democracy. Everything's about democracy. And I kept saying, where the hell is this coming from? Why is there such a push to brainwash and convince everyone that we, in fact, live in a democracy? One of the things that's shocking to people is I showed them Article 2, and I said, you know, they never intended for you to vote for president. Oh, no, that was all. I'm like, no. If you look at what it says, the state legislatures will select a board of electors. That's all it says. Now, how they went about that, I did some researches on the first election of the 13 colonies that then became states. 2 had not yet ratified the Constitution, so only 11 voted. 6 allowed people to vote. The other 5 did not. I think South Carolina didn't actually have people voting for the electors until I think 1852. So originally, one of my law professors brought this up. What they wanted was an aspect of a monarchy, and they really fought over the founders of what the executive branch would be. They wanted an aspect of an aristocracy, and that would be the U.S. Senate. And they only wanted one touch of democracy among the people in the structure of the federal government, and that was the House. And you could pick Farmer Brown, you could pick the dumbest guy down the street, you could pick whoever you wanted. If he got more than half the vote, he became your representative. But you know, the 17th Amendment did a lot to mess everything up too during the progressive era of the early 20th century. They never intended for the people to vote for the U.S. senator. Who selected the U.S. senators? The state legislatures. And they went there to be a check for the state against the people in the House. And so, you know what, I'm rambling here, but what I'm saying is we're so different than we were intended to be that you have massive amounts of people when they hear, yeah, it's a democracy. Sure it is. I heard that on the news. And then when you're saying people that might be considered more conservative, right, or whatever, are also chiming in that it's a democracy, we're lost. Thoughts?
We're in big trouble. That's what doggone.
We are.
And
We are. One more than half. You know the old saying, one more than half, it's 2 wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. That's democracy. Yes.
That's right. Wow.
There's great truth in that, right?
Oh my, yes. Another word is liberal. Got it. I'm a liberal. I'm a classical
That's right.
liberal.
Classical liberal.
I don't want to call those people liberals. Those people are fascists. They're socialists. They're soft communists. They're authoritarians. Why do we label them with such a nice word?
Well, I think that's part of the mind game that's been played over. None of this is new. Like I remember, you know, with the advent of YouTube, I'm watching in 1948, the first real, it might have been quasi-televised, but in 48, the Democrat National Convention, one of the major platforms that they're arguing about is national health care. Truman, and he's talking about that. You hear a little bit with Kennedy in 60. So then this whole thing started Hamilton, Jefferson. Are we going to have a strong central government? Is it going to be more of a loose confederation of the states? So this idea of the federal government top down has been the battle for 250 years, and we're still in the midst of it. But how the language has changed has had a great deal with how people, like you say, well, all of a sudden, I don't know, how many years ago has it been? 40, 50, 60 years ago, it becomes the liberal that's the hard left, or at least to the left. And I don't know where conservative necessarily came from, but you know, you find that a lot of people are truly what is now defined as libertarian. They are sort of, I want my money, I want to fund my own causes. You go live your life however you want. And there is a lot on the right that's like, no, we're going to let you have your money, but we're going to tell you more how to live your life. And then the left is, no, we're going to take your money and do whatever you want. And, you know, the libertarian view, and that's why some people will say, well, I'm kind of more in the center. But what they're really saying is they want the government to do the Bastiat vision. Stay out of my life. If you're going to provide these services, you better protect me. If you're going to step up and say you're going to provide for fire and police and the rest, at least do that. And the failure to do that in these last decade or so has definitely, I think, awoken a lot of people to the government's broken. It's got to get fixed. Now, you're doing a lot of groundwork here, you know, on the ground. I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm an attorney, will tell you, judges aren't generally listening. You're using the affidavit. But a lot of people that hear this, and I pray that a lot of people do hear this, how do they educate themselves to better be in the position? You self-educated. So how do they better educate themselves to be in the position to defend themselves.
That's why I put the course together. I have a course that's available, 50% discount through this program. I can only go so far in any discussion I have with people on the telephone. I talk to people across the country, and I just try and tell them, look, you got to do a lot of reading. As you said earlier, start with Bastiat's The Law. If that little book is too intimidating to you, just read the first third of it.
That's right.
He spends the last 2/3 of the book just taking on the arguments from the Democrat. But if you just understand the concept of plunder, that's when the government uses force in order to take property from some people and give it to others. It's interesting to note that Trump has non-consecutive presidencies. Grover Cleveland, the same. Why was Grover Cleveland thrown out of office? And he's a Democrat. Because Texas had an agricultural problem, the Congress passed legislation in order to give Texas specific assistance. And Grover Cleveland looked at the Constitution and said, oh, this isn't general welfare. This is specific help to Texas. And hey, he vetoed it. And that got so many people mad that that's why he lost the election. But he came back, like Trump. He stood on his principles and he came back. An even better example of this is Dr. Ron Paul.
Love him.
He's sitting in Congress listening probably to Sister Teresa, Mother Teresa. And when it gets all done, oh my gosh, let's give this woman an award and some money. And the vote was, 412 to 1. Oh,
that's Ron Paul.
One guy. Oh, it's that guy from Texas over there. So the media gets on him and says, how could you vote against Mother Teresa? And Ron Paul did the classic thing that just blew me away. He said that woman deserves that award, but not from the taxpayers' coffers. He took out his checkbook and he wrote the check and made it out to the United States Treasurer. He wanted to specifically say that woman deserves it from my pocketbook and from anybody else's pocketbook in the Congress that thinks that she deserves it. But don't you dare take one dime of the people's money in order to fund that, because it's not constitutional.
Well, you probably know the famous story. I just looked it up here to make sure I'm right on the time frame. Davy Crockett served 4 terms in the U.S. Congress from 1827 to 1835. And there's a moving story of, I think there was a burned out area in Washington, D.C., and they get together in Congress, and there's a talk about, hey, these people have lost their homes, things are tough, let's get together some money. And then someone wrote Crockett, how dare you? It's not your money. So he basically, to my knowledge of the story, informs the rest of Congress, I don't care how bad the tragedy, I don't care. This constituent said, it's not your money to spend. And I love the fact that you said what you did about Ron Paul. And I just think he's one of the most fabulous Americans. He's my favorite. What bothered me when he'd run for president, he'd get in the Republican debates, nobody understands what he's saying. I mean, I think he's as down to earth and down the center as he can be. But you can imagine, like you say, in that 430-something versus him vote, I'm sure everybody in the Senate was like, or in the House was like, what's he talking about? It's Mother Teresa, for God's sake. Or that's what they're thinking. But he's saying he's standing on the principle, and he stepped forward and put up the check himself. Who does that? We missed an opportunity with him. And Alan Keyes was another that I really loved, because Alan Keyes actually knows what's in the Constitution. And when the two of them were getting some traction in 2008, I thought maybe, but I know people today who are very influential on the air doing what we're doing here podcasting, who had their lives turned around by Ron Paul. They heard him and went, wait a minute, what's that guy saying? I know people. And they were hard to the left. And when they heard him and they actually heard his principles, they were like, okay, I got to listen to more with this guy. And I think there was a revolution with him. And I think some of that might be showing today. Hopefully.
Well, when Ron Paul went to Berkeley, the chant was, That's at Berkeley. The chant from the 10,000 people listening to him was liberty, liberty, liberty. 4 years later, it was Bernie, Bernie, Bernie. What do those two men have in common? Well, they speak the truth from their point of view. They're consistent in what they believe. They're not, at least Ron Paul most definitely, not easily bought. Well, Ron Paul was never bought. Bernie less so. Nevertheless, the students saw some principles in these men that stood out to them. And that's why I have great hope for America. I had an opportunity 2 summers to teach civics. I had a total of 120 students, and I had them for 3 weeks, 4 hours every day. And early on in the process, I said to them, I'm going to show you a movie. 1939 black and white. Don't turn this off. Give it time. I want you to see the end of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. When they got done watching Jimmy Stewart arguing in the Senate floor until he collapsed, when the movie was all over that day, I gave them all their daily quiz. And my last question was, rate the movie. 120 students, not one person on a scale of 0, terrible, to 10, the best ever, not one student rated that movie under an 8. The majority gave it a 9, and I had 6 or 7 students that said, best movie I've ever seen. 1939 black and white movie. Why? Because it's a man who stands for principles, and that's what these kids need. When we have a man that'll stand up for principle, and God bless him, obviously Donald Trump stands for principle, but it would also be nice if you could stand for principle and at the same time come across as a little more compassionate and more respectful of other people. That's my take on Donald Trump. I certainly believe he's the most courageous man I've ever seen running for political office. But nevertheless, the kind of attitude that Ron Paul presented, much softer, but far more firm and committed to the truth of the Constitution. It's just too bad that the Republican Party did to him what the Democratic Party did to Tulsi Gabbard and RFK. Just put the knife in the back and start turning it.
But you know, though, when you say that, and I think a lot of people feel that way about Donald Trump, I remember my father was Army. He was full colonel in the Army Reserve, and my mom, they just passed away in the last few years. And I remember one time my mom was like, yeah, I'm hearing Trump, but I wish he'd tone it down. And I remember my father said one day, he goes, I think it's going to take something more than a choir boy to clean it up.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I thought, okay. So we both have seen Ron Paul, beautiful man, beautiful message. Where did he go with the presidential thing? I think he opened some eyes, but I do think it took a certain type of personality to upset the apple cart.
Absolutely.
I just think, and I think, things are what they are. The Ayn Rand thing. Things are what they are. If you have a particular approach and later somebody has a different approach, it's one of those things that many friends are like, I just wish he wouldn't say. I'm like, it's what he is. And I think the what he is working. I think in the end, you have to look back and go, okay, after where he was in 2021, did he made it all the way back to 2024, alive even, and then got to this point. It's kind of hard to look at that and say that maybe his approach wasn't right. But I also think he is a toned down person from where he was 8 years ago. I think a lot of it has toned down.
Yeah.
I don't think the mission's toned down, but I do think the rhetoric has to some degree.
If you watched his interview with Oprah Winfrey over 30 years ago, it's the same guy.
Oh, sure.
It's the same guy.
Same
He hasn't
guy.
changed anything.
Same guy.
It's wonderful. We're blessed to have him. Absolutely.
I just hope the culture kind of catches up. I do think one thing that Tucker Carlson said, he goes, when people are talking about what does he mean by America great again, he goes, what he's trying to do is return us to 1980, 81 maybe. And I thought about that. I was talking to a friend because I'm old enough to remember. I'm like, hey, I'm tell you what, those late 70s were dark with what had happened with oil prices, the Iranian hostage situation, the malaise speech that Jimmy Carter gave, like, hey, Mary, maybe America, part of this downfall of our country is your fault. Interest rates are through the roof. You remember the whole thing. And Reagan went through a couple of tough years there, and it really wasn't the economy kicking in until around 83. But we start to see the Rambo movies. We see Top Gun. We see a return to military pride. There was a change in the 80s. And I think it can flip a switch pretty quickly. I think we're already seeing it. I think the culture is flipping over, because I think there was a large majority, the silent majority that was out there waiting to see when they could speak again. I think that's what's happening. And I do think the country is becoming somewhat more normal, but I'm still scared when the other shoe's going to drop.
Fight.
That's a big moment.
Big moment.
That was a big moment.
People are vocal now about what we stand for. I know I am. I engage a lot of people on the left on Facebook, and I feel like, and that's one of the things that I would like to convey to the audience here. I've got an idea. I've been writing President Trump consistently, and I've asked my friends to do so also. I would like if he would begin Sunday night fireside chats with the American people and bring in somebody from the left that's, open-minded, somebody who can speak intelligently and not be overly biased. And let's discuss the American vision and have Tulsi Gabbard and some of the other people who speak it so well, who's basically spent a lot of time on the left. And now they see the reality of, patriotism and nationalism not being a bad thing, being an appropriate thing, as long as you bring in compassion and the love of truth. But we can't turn our back on 75 million people who voted against Trump for what I believe the most incompetent, the most compromised presidential candidate in my entire life. Nothing to do with Kamala being a woman or being black. It's just that she just wasn't. There's 10 other people in the Democratic Party that were better suited to be president than her, that are well known. 75 million people voted against Trump, not so much for Kamala, but they voted against him. And we need to get 5 to 10% of those people to wake up so we can continue with the next 4 years after Trump, because you can't turn this thing completely around in 4 years. You're going to need longer time. It might take decades. We should try to get more Americans to love the Constitution. Let's talk about the Constitution. Let's talk specifically how to use the Constitution, as I do.
Well, here's a major concern that I've had through the years, and I think you would agree with me. A real eye-opener for me, I think was a documentary. I remember the guy's name was Eugene Jarecki, and it was a takeoff on the Frank Capra that did all the training, or did many of the training movies during World War II. He did a documentary called Why We Fight. And this is a big Ron Paul issue, as you know. Ron Paul was the first one to stand up, and he did it in 2008 during one of the Republican debates. He said, you know why you're getting a lot of this in the CIA and in the intelligence agency? They refer to it as blowback. You keep sticking your nose in places around the world that you don't belong, and there are consequences. So in this Eugene Jarecki documentary, they really get into, he opens with Eisenhower. I wrote my master's thesis on the Kennedy assassination, so I've always been fascinated by this. So Eisenhower, two-term president of the United States, 5-star general, supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe, supreme commander of NATO forces after the war, president of Columbia University, West Point graduate, middle of his class. You probably know that story. Eisenhower's a guy, he knows a little bit. And what does Eisenhower do on the way out with the Beware the Military-Industrial Complex? And I used to do talk radio with a friend of mine that was a Vietnam-era Marine. And I came in one day and I said, did you see, it was, they've replayed the 1964 black and white at the beaches of Normandy, Cronkite and Eisenhower. It's 1964, 20 years after D-Day. And when Eisenhower begins to speak of the D-Day invasion, he gets choked up. And I'm thinking, that's the guy you want to be president. That's him. It's not people that are willing to send other people's kids into harm's way and get their limbs blown off and die. That's always been my major concern. I don't like the idea that kids are generally poor, don't see a lot of other options. They join the military, and then the next thing you know, they're having to serve in places that the founders would have never, ever intended them to be. And that's my biggest problem. You don't take, Ned and June's kid from Topeka, Kansas, and put him in harm's way because you've got some other kind of political structure you're fighting for. So that's part of the reason I think that we're seeing some cleanup on aisle 6, because it's not about Republican and Democrat. It never really has been. It's been about the apparatus and all the rest of us. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of realignment. I think the people that you normally thought they're left, they're Democrat, they're right, they're Republican, they're kind of coalescing along those issues. And I think that's the realignment that you're seeing, hopefully so. But again, I've always thought the number one responsibility you have as commander in chief is where you put kids, young people in harm's way. That's number one. And something else about Kennedy and Nixon in 60, and I think you'll find this fascinating. 1960, you can find it on YouTube. Chet Huntley and the Huntley-Brinkley report. Huntley and Brinkley are doing the 60 election. And one of them, I think it was Brinkley, says, let me tell you what the M1A1 standard issue running for Congress is right now. So, all members of the House in 1960 are up for re-election. What percent of them do you think had served in the military in 1960 that were running?
You're asking me?
Yes, sir. What percent do you think were running for Congress had served in the military?
I'll go with 20%. 96.
96. Now think about it, though. What is 1960? You're 15 years removed from World War II.
Yeah.
And you're roughly a decade removed from Korea.
Yeah.
And in further research I found, think about it. If you're in Main Street, USA in 1960 and you're saying, I'm running for elected office, and somebody, I'm sorry, where were you in Korea? Where were you in World War II? You couldn't run.
That's right.
Then, as the colleges become more liberal in the 60s and people that are standing on the street that are, and I think in large part, rightfully so, against the war, they're also perceived as being somewhat against the military kids that are in Vietnam. They're the ones that are running the country now. I mean, fair to say, it's the people that went to college in the 60s and 70s that didn't serve in the military. I didn't serve in the military. I'm not making that argument. But what I'm saying is 1960 was a different world because those people had seen war or pretty much couldn't be in political office. And I think it maybe gave them, I could say that, but then we went right into Vietnam and made the very mistakes that Eisenhower, I think, warned us against. You've served. I mean, I think the views of the military on that are probably varied, but where do you think a lot of kids are today with that?
I would say that most kids are basically confused. They don't have great standards in front of them. I am a Christian, but I'm sad that I don't see even good Christian churches making the kind of statements, the political statements that need to be made. You heard that statement, in polite company, there's two things you shouldn't talk about, politics and religion. Well, those are the two things we have to talk about. Politics affects our lives. We have tons of homeless people in this country. We have 70% of the black kids being reared without a father in the home, 40% of white kids the same way. That all came about because we're not going to be involved in politics. Well, we're not involved in politics. Guess who will be running the country? People who don't have a biblical worldview. They're just going to do what they think is right. Bastiat talked about two things that happen if plunder becomes prevalent. And one of those things was that people would lose respect for the law.
Yes, sir.
And the other thing is they wouldn't even figure out what's right and wrong anymore. And that's why you come across, I'm out in front of Planned Parenthood and I'm talking to this guy. I said, is that your wife? No, that's my fiance. Well, okay, we talk more. I said, how long has she been your fiance? 5 years. 5 years. I said to him, let me ask you a question. You can't afford to get married, right? And his head went down and he said, yeah, I can't. Because she's getting so much money from the government for having those kids, and the minute they sign that agreement to become a married couple, they lose all of that. Right now, he's making 3,000, she's making 2,500. The minute they sign that paper, that 2,500 is gone. So they'll never get married. But the whole thing was, well, we got to help these women that don't have. Yeah, I agree we do, but the government doesn't do it. We, the people, are supposed to do that. We are supposed to have compassion. I drive by all these homeless people. I go to a pretty doggone good church. We've never helped one of them off the street. Not one.
Wow.
If every church in Riverside did one family, hey, that would make a dent, a big dent. And I think God would be really happy with that, and maybe the churches wouldn't be floundering so much financially. I just got to mention something here because you were talking about it earlier. Have you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman? Well, you got to read this. This is by John. This is what the CIA, the World Bank, and international corporations do to our sister countries to the south, Honduras, Guatemala, how we rape these countries by getting the leaders to engage in some kind of infrastructure project where John Perkins would go in at the first level and use bribery in order to get the system, like a hydroelectric plant started, a dam. And the end result was he fed them an ROI, return on investment, of 8%. He knew it was only 2.5%. So it's a matter of 15 to 30 years. They're going to default on the loan, and then the government is under the control of the World Bank. And this is what has been going on across the world. Now, he goes on and he says, if I'm not successful, then we send in the jackals. The jackals are the killers. He's talking about Torrijos down in Panama, who he had died in a mysterious plane crash. The same year, the nationalistic leader of Ecuador died in another one of those weird plane crashes. If the jackals don't work, then you send in the military. They couldn't get Saddam Hussein. They couldn't bribe him. They couldn't use the jackals on him, so they had to send in the military to get rid of him. This is the kind of information, the kind of books that Americans need to be aware of. We need to know we have an immigration problem because we caused it. We've raped these countries. We've made it nearly impossible for them to bring their people out of poverty. If you have a good leader like Bukele in El Salvador, there's a chance, but that's very rare. Most of these countries are floundering in poverty. You watch your child starve to death. You'll do anything to make sure that doesn't happen again. Confessions of an Economic Hitman, John Perkins. We need to read this.
I will definitely look into that. Okay. Sorry, we've kind of diverted from your original story going in. I think that people do want to look into some of the instruction you're given. Getting back into sort of where we are with the court system in the day-to-day, I feel I had a friend of mine that opened a restaurant in a particular city in Virginia a few years ago. And then what I saw, she opened it with a friend. What I saw, and I can imagine what it's like in California, but what I saw what they went through to try to get the doors open of a restaurant, it was just unbelievable. And we've just gone through, roughly 5 years ago now, what we went through in this country where so many small businesses went out. But so many people that just want to make, they have an idea, they want a brick and mortar store, which I think is just completely dying away. But the amount of regulation, taxation, and the like that goes along with trying to run a business makes it next to impossible. You have to make a profit. And, the government at every level, state, local, federal, they're all trying to get a piece of the pie. And I know people become frustrated with that. I remember seeing that at the turn of the 20th century, 90% of Americans, this was very interesting, 90% of Americans worked for themselves because they were basically farmers. And then 10% of the people worked for the government or other. And then 100 years, that completely flipped. Very, very few people actually do work for themselves. Now, I think with the internet and what's going on today, but you're seeing we still don't produce anything. We don't make tangible products. We just get out here on the air, maybe talk or try to trade in some kind of way services, but there's not a lot of concrete things made anymore in America, which also I think comes into the problems that people, I mean, where I'm at in life and where I think a 20-year-old, I still coach college baseball. I'm around young people, 19 to 22 years old. I really feel for them because I really don't know what their prospects for a future are. Like, what do they do? What do they go into? You know, what kind of fields are really available? They're $150,000 in debt from college. Many will be. And that whole scam has kind of really shown itself to be a scam as well. So I know we're talking about a lot of cultural issues, the mechanics of the government. It's a large ship. Do you feel like today and where we are, that ship is being turned around enough that we're going to see within, say, a decade, a more prosperous country? I guess that would be my question. You think we're going to be able to turn it around enough to put us in a different position?
I can only hope so. And I'm certainly an optimist.
Yes, sir.
I'll be going to Wisconsin for meetings at the end of the month, and I'm going to move across the country with the best I can do. I tell my friends, Anna Sewell wrote one book, Black Beauty. The purpose was to educate the people of England primarily with the value of the horse and how horses have been mistreated. She wanted to raise up the educational understanding of people regarding horses. I wrote one book on parenting the passive rebel. That was basically just a primer for learning how to publish a book. But my book, Officer Hanson, Compassion in Blue, started out as simply my desire to see less violence in policing. That Dale Brown in Detroit has been teaching Detroit PD and other police officers around the country how to disarm violent situations so you won't have to disarm violent people. When I met him, I realized this is practical. My ideas can be put into place because he had a website at the time that had 7 police officers, all came on for 2 or 3 minutes, and they're all saying the same thing. I've been a police officer for 15 years, 20 years, 22 years. Why weren't we never taught this? We wouldn't have people getting shot, and we wouldn't have all these lawsuits. So Dale Brown conveyed to me time after time, he teaches these people, so he gives me all these different scenarios, and I realize, hey, wait, there's not just 1, 2 solutions. There's 5 different possibilities here. And Dale Brown would give me actual things that he's done in Detroit in order to decrease violence. Is that a wonderful experience? Then I come along Margie and Jack, and they teach me, hey, how to use the power of paper to change government 1 agent at a time. An affidavit is nothing more than just a statement of truth taken before an officer of the court, a notary, could be an official at your local bank. It's notarized, it's certified, and it goes to them, and they have a responsibility to answer. And that's what my gift to your audience is.
Absolutely.
It's the template. It's that first paragraph that spells out to them their legal responsibility to answer. Don't tell me to go to an attorney. You wanted the job. This is part of your job description. If you can't back up what you're doing with the law, then you got a problem, because in the next 2 or 3, 4 paragraphs, I'm going to spell out to you how I see the law. It's your responsibility to rebut it. And then the final paragraph. If you do not rebut this within 30 days, everything in it can be used against you in any court in America. I took Best Buy to the small claims court. They said I had to wear a mask. I said, there's no laws. Yes, there is. No, there's a mandate from the governor, and he doesn't make laws. He gives you suggestions. You want to call it a mandate, but it's no better than a suggestion. Well, you still can't come in. So I had to go through the process of bringing them into court. People say, well, did you win? They had to show up. That was a win. They couldn't just send a letter into to the judge and say, I'm not coming in because this is bogus. No, they had to show up. The second thing is, I learned, this as far as I'm concerned, another win. I filed a motion to hear my constitutional rights, make sure that they're heard. The court didn't respond until the morning of the hearing, and they declined it. Whoa. Okay, so the next time I'm going down there, I'll go in there a week in advance, a special appearance before the judge. I'm going to leave until we discuss this matter because I had it declined last time. So here I learned law. Sometimes they play games with you. Most of the time they play games with you because they figure you're a pro per and you don't know anything. That's never true, but we learn by doing. We don't learn by not doing. And I also sent an affidavit to the commissioner, pointing out to her exactly what she did wrong in the course of the hearing. She didn't rebut it. So I've got a document now that I can carry with me. If she ever shows up in front of the courtroom again, in any case, I will recuse her because I've got evidence right here that you were told how you violated the Constitution of the United States and you just let it go. I don't want you sitting on my case.
I'm interested in, this is a small point, but on the Best Buy case, so you went to a Best Buy location, you hit the door and they start talking masks. Did you leave on that day and then go take action? Or did you leave when they said wear a mask or leave the day you were in Best Buy?
That day, I said, well, then I'll tell you what, have a salesperson come out here because I'm going to tell the salesperson what I want. And she went in and got it and she came back out and we transacted all on the sidewalk. But then
Gotcha.
I went home and I put the affidavit together. I had to travel to Glendale to serve it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because the corporate headquarters are in Minneapolis. But 3 months later.
But they have a registered agent there.
Yeah.
And you serve process.
Right.
Okay.
Now, when government agents, I just send it directly to wherever they're located. We have, as of this week, we have six affidavits on the way to our Attorney General of the state of California. And we've never done this. I don't know if anybody's ever done this, but our intention will be in 30 days to file a case remedy at law Riverside versus Bonta. We're going to take him into small claims court for discriminating against our constitutional rights. Basically, 2 or 3 things. The big thing is he thinks this is a sanctuary state. And he got a letter from the Trump administration. We just took the body, a lot of the information in that letter, and put it into our affidavit. You are violating federal law. The supremacy clause in the Constitution says you got to bend. You better bend all the way down. Now, my thing is, I love what Trump's doing, but I've always felt like it's we the people, it's not they the elected. Trump's doing his job, but what are we doing? This guy is running over the law and we're doing nothing? We're waiting for Trump to take care of the problem? That's not the way the government's supposed to work. It's we the people. I have to train 30 to 50 people in Riverside County to do what I do, and then we start going after these guys. And that's all we do, because I live by a couple of mottos. John Quincy Adams said after the only guy who ever went back to Congress after losing election presidency. And what were his words? You remember those?
Mm-mm.
Duty is ours, the results are God's. Because they said to him, you've been in it for 20 years. You put all these amendments, anti-slavery amendments. What good has it done? He says, duty is ours, the results are God's.
Wow.
So that's how I live. I live by just doing what I'm supposed to do to the best of my ability, open to counsel. Don't think I know everything. I don't know a lot. But this is the way we are supposed to live our lives, as a sacrifice for other people and for the right cause. You know, Jimmy Stewart said it was a lost cause. America is not a lost cause. God forbid. At least this generation has an opportunity to change it. And it takes people like you and me, older people, instilling in younger people the desire to fight, to not give up. And then they'll come to us. They're looking for a purpose in life. Let's give them one.
You know what scares me too? 30 years ago, I was I was a substitute teacher at a school that was in, I think, the second poorest county in the state of North Carolina. there were a lot of things that were said to the students by the teachers. Woe is us. You're in a bad position in life. It was really, really a lot of negativity in the county, in the school. I go in there and run my mouth. I get in there. I'm in graduate school. I'm working on the thesis, and I just talk to them. And a young lady, this was powerful. A young lady stops me in the hallway after I had been in a class with her a few times. And she's 16, and she goes, Mr. Can I speak to you for a second? I said, sure. She said, first time I heard you talk, I hated your guts. And I was like, okay. She goes, the second time I heard you talk, I really listened to what you were saying. And now I want to thank you because you've made me feel I can do anything. And all I was doing was going in there. And I would talk to these teachers. They were so negative about these kids. Well, those babies don't have a chance. They don't have a chance. And they just run them down, and they don't have an opportunity. They grew up in the wrong part of the world. I was just going, but she literally came up and said, it took me a while to actually hear what you were saying because I've never heard anyone say this before. And I now feel like I can do anything. And I want to thank you. And I went, wow. Like, I'm not trying to blow my own horn, but I was trying to give a more positive message. And I listened to the people there. And you would say, well, what if they have this skill? Or what if they have, oh, no, they'll never make it out of here. No, nobody ever makes it out of here. That's all you ever heard from the teachers. And I'm not a big fan of public education in the first place, but I thought it became kind of a festering sore of excuses and bad thoughts. And it was really, really sad. It was sad to be in the place because I thought these poor kids have to be in this environment. I mean, they're being required by law, which compulsory educations could probably be another discussion too on what all that means. But I really have enjoyed this. Please give me in your closing here anything else you want to tell about what you do, where people can reach you, more on your training of people to know their rights and laws.
First off, I promise that special gift. If you go to affidavitsecrets.com/more, you'll get the template. We're also going to ask you for your phone number because I would like to send you chapter summaries from the Officer Hansen book that you can kind of follow along and see what I'm trying to do because I cover a lot of history in this book. My hero, Officer Hansen, ends up in Iraq during the Iraq War. I have one chapter entitled The Battle for Haditha Dam. I got that out of a documentary. I just put my hero into that situation. So you can learn a little bit about the Iraqi War. My book, I try also to I push other books in my book. For instance, General Smedley Butler's War is a Racket. I have a chapter in my book called War is a Racket, in which I talk about Smedley Butler. The last 8 chapters of my book basically begin with the power of paper. When I started writing my book, I never thought I'd be talking about affidavits. But at the end of the book, I do because what I try to paint is a model county, a county where the sheriff, the DA, and the people work together to investigate and get rid of corrupt individuals. Where we have a DA that says there'll be no plea bargain, sir. You're going to go to jail. We have constant situations in our county that are no different than across the country. Where even when corrupt officials get caught, they end up leaving with a good pension. They just go somewhere else and start all over again. They got caught with their hand in the cookie jar and they don't go to jail. There's a lot of learning in my book. It took 8 years to write the book because I'd go 6 months, 8 months before I even wrote another chapter. Then something else would come along and say, that fits, I'm going to put that in the book. So you've got the free template, and if you buy the course, you'll also have the opportunity to get a hold of my telephone number. It's there. That's how you usually pay. And you can get in touch with me. I'm not busy at this point in my life. All my kids are reared, and I'm pretty much retired. So I have a lot of time to chat with people. I hope that'll change in the future because there'll be too much to do. So the book, the course, all of that's available to people. And the main thing is get bestia's the law and read the law. Start with that. And some of the other books that I've mentioned, Confessions of an Economic Hitman and Smedley Butler's War is a Racket. Be a reader, not just a listener. Take out some good books and read them. A Book of the Month Club, your own personal Book of the Month Club. Do it and do it consistently and you'll make a difference. I think that's all, Mr. Moore.
Well, sir, I want to read this with you in closing for the audience. Everyone that's listening, this gentleman and I know are kindred spirits. We're of the same faith and thought, I'm sure. But it's interesting that, again, I've mentioned to many people the law and they've never heard of it. And I want you to hear the opening. The law perverted and the police powers of the state perverted along with it. The law, I say, not only turned from its proper purpose, but made to follow an entirely contrary purpose. The law has become the weapon of every kind of greed. And instead of checking crime, the law itself guilty of the evils it's supposed to punish. If this is true, it is a serious fact, and moral duty requires me to call the attention of my fellow citizens to it. That's 1848. What has changed? Nothing. Mankind is mankind. That language where he is identifying the law used to an improper purpose is so important. And what we're seeing, hopefully in the news, is maybe some tearing down of that. God bless you, fine sir. That's the end of our show. We will get together again very soon.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, subscribe and hit your notification button to get an update when we post another episode. See you soon.